Welcome to MacStories Unwind, a weekly review of everything MacStories and more. This episode of MacStories Unwind is brought to you by Good Task. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing really well. You know what? We are back with another week under our belts post WWDC. I feel like I still feel like we're working through the aftermath of WWDC in a sense, just because there's still a lot of exploration of the OS is going on. And just as we record this, the developer beta 2 is out. So we've had a little bit of a chance to look at that. I know you were poking around and found a few things already.
I'm poking, all right? Yes. I've been poking at the new beta.
Good.
There's a few new things that I want to point out, which I think are interesting, if you will allow me, John.
Yeah, absolutely. And we should mention that we are talking only about iOS and iPadOS right now, because there is no new beta of macOS just yet. Hopefully that will be coming soon too.
I see. Okay, but watchOS is also out, I believe.
True.
Yes.
Nobody in their right mind puts watchOS on their watch day one like you do, Federico. I know you did, but I did not do it.
So iOS and iPadOS 15, new icon for maps.
Oh, all right.
There's
Big
there's a shade of purple in there now.
Oh.
I think it's nice. But whatever. XL widget size for music on iPad. So this is new. Obviously, the XL size is exclusive to iPadOS 15. And previously in beta 1, the new size was only available for, I believe, files, calendar, TV, maybe Game Center. But now there's also one for music. And I've been talking about how I kind of want to set up a music home screen. And this widget is kind of perfect for that because being XL, it contains a lot of albums you can tap to reopen in the music app. So that's cool. Safari, we're starting to see the first Safari changes, I think. This is the first wave of updates that I feel like Apple will bring to Safari. No changes on iPhone, but some changes on iPad. And I'm not sure how I feel about them, but I'm also not totally surprised. The reload button and the Safari reader button are back in the address bar, or what's it called? The unified bar, whatever. You know what I mean?
It's basically the address bar, though, yes.
But only if you hover over the address bar.
So you have to have a keyboard attached. Otherwise, you have to have a pointing device, I guess, of some kind.
So you need to have a pointing device. I thought, I guess the system is smart, and if it detects that I'm not using a trackpad, maybe the reload button is always shown, but no, it isn't. It isn't. But it should be like that, though. It should be like, I guess the bigger point here is, but why, though? Like, why can it not be persistent in the address bar?
Right.
It's not bothering anyone. There's enough horizontal space. And look, I appreciate that Apple is listening, right? And they're bringing back UI that they previously hid in the developer beta 1. Like, I appreciate that you're listening. But this is not the first time we're seeing this kind of interaction, right? That Apple wants to hide UI, but only show you UI elements if you hover with your cursor where you're supposed to hover.
Right.
Which for power users may be okay, but I still don't understand. Like, an iPad Pro especially is wide enough to accommodate a simple reload button.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's just so much that's hidden that to me really should be surfaced better. Like, we've already talked about the share button before. I've found that really the best way to deal with these hidden things is to use, long presses. Because if you're, especially on the iPhone, when you have the address bar on the bottom, you can long press on it to get to share that way, which is 2 taps instead of 3. So that's probably my preferred way of doing it. But that's not something I discovered right away. And I think a lot of people won't find that at all. And there's all different things you can long press on now. You can long press on the address bar. You can long press on the back arrow. You can long press on the ellipse button. You can long press on the tab button. There's something behind all of those. But the problem is that there's no way to get to some of the most common things behind there without knowing that you can do that. And I just don't think average people know that that's even a feature of the iPhone and iPad.
Yeah. So we'll see how that goes, and I really want to see what Apple does on the iPhone.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
And on the Mac, where I feel like of all three, the iPhone and the Mac are probably the worst versions of Safari. The iPad is somewhere in the middle, where because of the form factor being, not like bigger than an iPhone but smaller usually than a Mac.
Yeah.
It doesn't suffer from the same issues of either version, but we'll see. I want to see what happens on the iPhone in beta 3, and I want to see beta 2 on the Mac.
Don't get me started on the Mac, because I've been playing around with Safari a lot more over the last couple of days, and parts of it are driving me crazy. The more tabs if you get to the point where your tabs are small enough, unlike the iPad, where I know that you talked about this a little bit on Connected, or Mike raised it on Connected, where the pointing device will just, you'll close the tab instead of switching to it, because it'll snap to the X. On the Mac, the close button just disappears. So there's no way to close it. You have to switch to it, because that then expands the tab, and then there's an X that you can tap, that you can click on. So that's a two click interaction now to close a tab, which is no good. But anyway, all right, we're getting awfully negative here, Federico.
Exactly.
I think we need some positivity, and
positivity is shortcuts. All right,
exactly. We're going to talk about shortcuts today. We didn't have a lot of stories on this site this week because you and I have been busy with other things. But I want to talk. I guess I want to start in the reverse order of how we've got this in our notes here, which is I want to talk about Dr. Drang's post that he.
No, but let me tell you first. Let's go even further in the reverse order. Let me tell you first what's new in beta 2 for iOS 15.
All right. I forgot that there are shortcut changes, aren't there?
We're going to do this backwards all the way. In the latest beta, there's a new... So this is a feature of iOS 15, the fact that Siri can see what's on screen. The idea is that you can say, Siri, send this to John. And this can be like a web page or an album or, I don't know, anything that I guess can be captured with a user activity, in theory, should support this technology. This is a new Siri feature. However, shortcuts can also participate in this new functionality. So there's when you're setting up a shortcut, if you go into the shortcut settings and you go to input, where you can pick all the different input types that are passed to a shortcut, there's a new toggle for receive what's on screen. And the idea is that you will be able, I guess, in compatible apps, to pass input to a shortcut without using the share sheet. Because if the shortcut runs, sees what's on screen without you having to manually activate and trigger the shortcut via the share sheet. So, for example, you set up a shortcut. I did this. I set up a shortcut that simply displayed an alert for the input.
Okay.
And I opened Safari, I opened an article on MacStories, and I triggered via voice my shortcut, and the shortcut displayed the URL of the MacStories article. And now this happened without having to use the share sheet, because shortcut could see what was on screen. And on screen, it saw a web page, and it gave me the URL of the web page.
Well, it's handy now that the share button has been hidden, so... Just use Siri instead.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm thinking of like down the road. I could see this like right now. And when I say these things, John, you should know that I'm taking notes of the things I say, because the podcasts are very useful for me, because I'm thinking through it and I realize things. So I'm taking notes. I could see down the road, if we ever get the ability to trigger shortcuts system-wide with a hotkey, I could see this being useful, because it means you will be able to pass input to a shortcut even if you activated it from a keyboard shortcut instead of the share sheet.
Yep, that would be really interesting. Yeah,
which is something that the Mac never had, really.
Right.
Because this idea of seeing what's on screen and capturing the state of the screen, that's a new Siri and sort of intelligence feature, I guess.
That's a new concept altogether.
Yeah.
That's really cool. That's an interesting thing. I have a complete tangent aside for you too, which is The shared with you, we talked about this a little bit in our upcoming episode of App Stories. Music isn't part of that. And
wait, what?
For whatever reason, I thought it was. I was going back through, at least on the Mac, I was going through the Mac preview page for Monterey today, and music's not listed, which is, to me, my jaw almost hit the ground.
I see it. I saw you. I saw a recommendation from you in music. Oh, I'm sure.
All right. Well, we're going to have to double check this.
Maybe on the Mac it isn't.
I haven't seen it in any of my recommendations on the iPhone yet, but I haven't gotten any recommendations from you or Mike or anybody in a while. So it could just be that. And it wasn't in the Mac preview page, and I didn't see a section on my Mac in music, but I've got to do some more digging to see. But yeah, I was a little surprised.
Interesting. So you were saying about Dr. Drang and shortcuts.
Dr. Drang wrote an article back in 2019 about when the first rumors of shortcuts on the Mac had popped up. And I think he was back then responding to an article that Guy Rambo had done on 9 to 5 Mac. And his concern that was expressed in that article was that shortcuts would be a Catalyst app, and because of the nature of the way Catalyst apps were built, especially at the time, that it wouldn't be able to hook in at a low enough level to support things like shell scripting and AppleScript and Automator and that sort of thing. And his post this week was, a positive one where he was, surprised, pleasantly surprised, I guess, to find that no, the Shortcuts for Mac app is in fact an AppKit app. It's a Swift UI app, and it does support those things because they've not only kind of built it with the underlying technologies of AppKit apps, but also have done a lot of work to make sure that things like scripting work in it. Now, not all these things work in the app yet because we're just on beta 1, but those are features that were announced at WWDC, and I expect we'll see them relatively soon in working order. So I'm really looking forward to that. It's really one of the most powerful potential features here because it really means that apps like Keyboard Maestro and Hazel and Better Touch Tool, any of those automation tools that can run scripts, whether they're Apple scripts or shell scripts or whatever it happens to be, they should just work out of the box running a script that triggers a shortcut without those developers having to do anything to support shortcuts. Now, I know from talking to a lot of the developers who make apps like those that they are working on actual shortcuts integration themselves. But even without that, a lot of these apps are going to have some measure of support right out of the box, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, and you know what's also fascinating is the thought of what Apple has done with automation and scripting here, possibly extending to iOS and iPadOS too eventually. Like, why is it that the run shell script action is Mac only, right? And you could say, well, because the terminal is on the Mac, right? But a shell-based engine might as well also exist on iOS and iPadOS. Now, I don't want to read too much into this, but I saw a couple of hours ago, Steve Moser from Mac Rumors post a screenshot of code strings from iOS 15 Beta 2 showing localized strings for AppleScript and shell script and what else? JavaScript for automation.
JavaScript, right, yeah.
In shortcuts for iOS. So in the iOS firmware file. Now, maybe this is something that Apple forgot. Maybe this is a mistake, I doubt that AppleScript is coming to iOS.
Yeah, I don't see it really because I feel like Apple has already said the scripting languages like PHP are gone from the Mac, and Python has basically been kind of deprecated. And I feel like that Apple's going a different direction with scripting, and that whatever that direction ends up being is going to be what replaces these things. And I have a hard time believing that the way to create those scripts is going to be something like AppleScript. I think AppleScript's not going away. I think it's going to be around for a very long time on the Mac. But given that shortcuts is the way of the future, I guess, for automation on the Mac. I'd be more. I think we're more likely to see something like Swift scripting, for instance, running directly in shortcuts on iOS, and
that I could see. Yes,
you know what I mean, and without the need for another way of creating scripts like AppleScript or the terminal or something like that. But maybe, I mean, I did see that tweet too, and it is interesting. But I mean, part of me thinks that, well, we've now got these integrated apps that are on all platforms, and the fact that there are strings in them that are Mac only strings, they may just be hidden on the iPad and iPhone versions and show up on the Mac version because it checks what the app is running on. But who knows? I mean, it is kind of an interesting theory. Federico, also this week, Darkroom, one of my favorite photo editing and management apps, added very deep integration for shortcuts. Now, there have not been a lot of good photo apps that have integrated with shortcuts, other than just doing things like opening the app or maybe sharing a photo or something like this. But Darkroom can now do things like flag and reject and favorite images. It can also do fairly sophisticated editing where it can do things like add a frame, apply a filter. Oh, and change the aspect ratio too, do cropping, all within shortcuts. So you might wonder, how would you do that in shortcuts without really, how do you automate that? Because it's like a manual task typically. But especially with things like filters, I think if you're, for instance, you had an afternoon and you took a bunch of pictures at the beach and you went in and you edited one of them and you kind of came up in Darkroom, you can save your own filters in that app. You came up with a filter that's perfect for that day at the beach, then you could do a shortcut and then just apply that filter to all the rest of your photographs all at once. That's an example of when you might use it, where you had a batch of photos that you wanted to do that to. Or you could use it through files, I think, to do things like favorite a bunch of photos that are in the Files app, something like that. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. I know Pixelmator Pro is working on shortcuts integration too on the Mac. So we're going to get some interesting photo shortcuts where we haven't really had any before. And I've played around with these a little bit and like what I'm seeing so far, but I haven't found a lot of use cases where I'll probably use them myself. I'm just glad to see that there's, these sophisticated shortcut actions are available because they use all the current tools like parameters and so forth to automate all kinds of photography needs.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite examples of how to do the job right and integrate with shortcuts to have different types of actions with all kinds of parameters. Tasks that required a manual interaction before can now be automated and combined with other things in shortcuts now. So it's like you're taking the functionality of your app and you're making that into an action that can become part of something else completely unrelated to Darkroom in shortcuts.
Right, like posting to social media or using
or combining to your blog.
Or combining it with other photo apps that offer actions that do things to photos that Darkroom doesn't. That's the kind of thing. It may be that there are great ways to string Darkroom and Pixelmator Pro together in the future. It'll be interesting to see.
All right, John, let's move on to the club now. Because I think we both had some fun with shortcuts in MacStories Weekly this week. So I wrote about, I actually didn't tell you this, I think, but something that has been nagging me for a while. I rethought how I trigger my saved timers in Timery using shortcuts on the home screen.
Oh, interesting.
So, this all started because I had this custom shortcut that I've been using for like a year called Podcast Timers. Mm-hmm. And that was like a custom menu that I put together, and it contained a lot of duplicate actions for starting a timer for either show notes or recording one of my many shows. And it felt very inefficient. There were a lot of duplicate actions inside of it. Right. And also, because of that approach of like for each option, I had like a custom, like hard-coded start new time entry action.
Right.
I don't know. It felt very inefficient and very heavy.
Yeah, they were all basically you're taking like 5 or 6 different shortcuts that were essentially the same, but in combining them into a menu, right?
Yes. So what I did was I took a different approach. I took all my most frequently used timers, and I made all of them saved timers in the Timery app. So these include things like show notes for app stories or recording connected, but also club research or editing MacStories Weekly, like the things that I do on a regular basis. So I made all of those presets, right? So they're always consistent. They always have the same description and the same tags. What I did then is I set up 2 shortcuts. One called podcast timers, which would be like the new version of the shortcut, and the other called saved timers. And then I used some magic, which you can read in MacStories Weekly, to prettify that list of timers. So the one of them, it starts with a list of projects that also have emoji. And the other starts, like the saved timers one, it starts like, are you working on MacStories, Club MacStories, or admin stuff? So I choose the project first, and then I choose the task. The podcast one, it starts the opposite way. It asks me like, in which mode are you in? Like, are you doing show notes or are you recording? And then I pick the show. So you can read and you can see the screenshots of my approach in issue 278 of MacStories Weekly. There's links to both shortcuts. I should say I created those shortcuts in iOS 15. So if you're not running 15, they're just comprised of 9 actions and there's screenshots in the story. You can easily recreate it yourself. Because especially the tricky part that I explained, which involves a regular expression, you can just copy it from my screenshot. Now I have 2 widgets and a much better system to trigger save timers.
Yeah, I like that. That's a really good idea. All right, Federico, let me tell you about App Stories this week. And we had an episode 228 all about your note-taking and research for your review this year, which is, as we've talked about several times now, based on Obsidian and all the things you're doing to make that happen with plugins and other techniques to backlink between sections and that sort of thing. And it was a good discussion because even though it's about your iOS review, it's the kind of research that I think is broadly applicable to a lot of different people doing research and taking notes. All right, Federico, I'm going to move on and tell you a little bit about our sponsor this week. Right. And it's one of my favorite apps. It's GoodTask. GoodTask is a powerful, customizable task manager for getting things done on the iPhone, iPad, Mac, and the Apple Watch. What makes it so powerful is that it's based on Apple's reminder system and on calendars too. It's a really solid foundation that GoodTask extends with fast, reliable syncing, Siri shortcut support, widgets, and a whole bunch more. It's also highly customizable. You can view your tasks in the lists in a Kanban-style board, and you can use filters to create smart lists based on all sorts of criteria that are important to you. The app also offers quick actions to integrate multiple task options into a single tap or click, and eliminating all sorts of repetitive typing, which is one of my favorite features and something that I use a lot. The app offers fully customizable widgets, making it easy to see your tasks on your home screen, and you can also see your calendar at a glance. There's even a theme system to make your app your very own, as well as ways to set personal goals and review reports of the tasks that you've completed. Start getting things done today by visiting GoodTask's website to learn more about this terrific app. That's goodtaskapp.com, and learn more about what it can do for you on the Mac, iOS, iPadOS, and even watchOS, and discover the power of this premier task managing system based on Apple reminders and calendars. Again, that's goodtaskapp.com. Our thanks to GoodTask for their support of the show. All right, Federico, I need a recommendation from you for Unwind. I've seen a blank here. You keep these in your head now. You like to surprise me with them, don't you?
I like to surprise you every day, John.
You manage that most days. Good job.
We're like in a romantic relationship. Only the
things
I do are for like apps, and Unwind recommendations.
All right, that's a little creepy and weird, but all right, I'll run with it.
I like to surprise you, despite the fact that we've been working together for years. You know, it's a good thing.
It is a good thing. I try
like
to do that myself.
Keep it alive. You know,
we do. We can't get bored. Any good relationship, you don't want to get bored in.
Exactly.
All right, Federico, tell me what you got for me. What are you going to surprise me with today?
There's this new TV show that we're obsessed with. Sylvia and I have been sort of binging on Netflix called The Bold Type. So this is a comedy drama series. You can watch the first 3 seasons on Netflix. Season 4 and Season 5, which is the last one. I believe the show is actually ending like forever soon.
Okay.
You can find the last 2 seasons on iTunes. That's our plan. So The Bold Type, it's about 3 millennial women who work at a fictional sort of women's magazine called Scarlet. And it's set in New York City. So this show is about the lives of these 3 women, their relationships, their struggles at work, their relationship with one another, obviously, but also it's about the publishing world, right? And that's what fascinates me really about.
That's what drew you in.
That's what drew me. The relationship aspect is also very good. Like you have 3 wildly different characters, and so I think it's interesting from the very first episode. But also the setting of the publishing world and these publications struggling with declining print sales, and the digital component rising because of web traffic and social media managers. It's all very interesting and something I can relate to.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very good TV show. It's, if you're looking for this kind of comedy / drama, sort of also office type series, give it a go on Netflix. You can watch the first 3 episodes. If you think it's something that's worth your time, trust me, keep watching. Otherwise, I think it's the kind of thing where you can immediately tell if this is a show for you or not. It's not a slow burn. Like it starts right there in the middle of the story. So you cannot go wrong. Just watch the first one and you can decide.
Yeah, and I did that, and I enjoyed it a lot because you mentioned this to me earlier in the week, actually. And it is
It's not a surprise, damn it.
No, it's not. It was a surprise at the time. And I think you said the first 3 episodes, and you meant the first 3 seasons, right? Those are 3 seasons on Netflix?
Oh, yes, sorry, 3 seasons.
Yeah.
Are 3 episodes would be inefficient.
You must be watching this on Italian Netflix, I want to say.
Italian Netflix, but in English. Obviously.
Okay, the reason I mentioned that is because when I went to go look for it the other night with Jennifer, it is not on U.S. Netflix. But it is on Hulu. If you have Hulu, you can find it there in the United States.
Thank you for the clarification.
Sure. It's probably on iTunes here too, although I haven't looked there either. But
it is. I can tell you because I have a US iTunes.
Oh,
account.
That's right. we know about that. You got your Dear John letter this week. We can talk about that some other time.
No, we cannot talk about that. We're not talking about that.
All right. My pick this week is Long Lost by Lord Huron, and this is an album that came out, I don't know, maybe 2-3 weeks ago. And I think the sound of this, it's like a very twangy guitar sound that has a lot of country aspects to it in a way. It's very mellow. And it reminds me a little bit of like Chris Isaak from back in the 90s, I guess, or early 2000s. It has a little bit of that vibe to it, the Wicked Worlds by Chris Isaak. But in any event, it's 16 tracks, really good. It's got spatial audio, and while not all spatial audio recordings are equal, really, this one is a good one from when I've listened to it. I was using my AirPods Pro, and it does a really nice job of kind of, the guitars are just a little bit off to the left, and one of the lead singer is off to the right, and the backup singer is a little bit off to the left. You get a sense of space, but it's not but it's not overdone in an overly gimmicky way, and it's not that kind of, I know you've had some experiences where everything's been kind of muddied. And the vocals have kind of disappeared. This is not that. This is more like there's separation in the different vocals of the different people singing, and actually gives you a better sense for, like you had a band in your living room playing for you. So I enjoyed it a lot, and I highly recommend it. So that's on Apple Music and Spotify and everywhere else you might find your streaming music. All right, Federico, that's it for this week. We'll be back in another week. You can find the two of us over at MacStories.net. Federico is on Twitter and Instagram, where he is at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWES. Talk to you next Friday, Federico.
Ciao, John.